Hi, everyone, and we're so glad that you could be here with us today. I'm Christy from the Million Cat team. Probably a lot of you have exchanged email with me in the last few weeks as you've joined the challenge or had questions that you wanted to have answered, and now you can get them answered by the real experts, our founders. However, before we begin, I'd like to say a few words about Maddie's fund and Maddie, the little dog who started it all. The Million Cat Challenge is sponsored by Maddie's fund, and without that support, we wouldn't be here. They are also generously offering the grants to challengers that have brought many of you here today. Their support has been invaluable to us and to cats. Maddie's fund, which a lot of you may not know, was founded by Dave and Cheryl Duffield to honor the spirit and unconditional love of the dog who was there for them while they were struggling to start a business. She was a little miniature schnauzer named, of course, Maddie. And they promised Maddie, when she was there with them at their toughest times, that if they ever made it big, they'd work to make the country a better place for dogs and cats in her honor. And I know a lot of us sit around going, well, if I won the lottery, I would do this and do that. And the Duffields have had the opportunity to actually fulfill that dream for themselves, for the memory of Maddie, and for all of her kind in the United States. And we are so very grateful to them. We would like to thank Maddie and also to thank the Duffields for having their hearts open to being inspired by her spirit and her love, and to thank Maddie's Fund for knowing every cat counts. Today, we are very lucky to be joined by the co-founders of the Million Cat Challenge, Dr. Julie Levy of the Maddie Shelter Medicine Program at the University of Florida, and Dr. Kate Hurley of the UC Davis Corrett Shelter Medicine Program. Dr. Levy has been performing research into community cats for many years. She is the author of more than 100 journal articles and textbook chapters, many of them on community cats and other cats. She is the founder of Operation Catnip, with 2 university-based feral cat spay-neuter programs that have sterilized more than 45,000 cats since it was founded. Her interests have centered on the health and welfare of animals in shelters, feline infectious diseases, humane alternatives for cat population control, and contraceptive vaccines for cats. She's the recipient of the Carl J. Norden Pfizer Distinguished Teacher Award, Outstanding Woman Veterinarian of the Year, and the European Society of Feline Medicine Award for outstanding contributions in the field of feline medicine. Not to be outdone by that, Dr. Kate Hurley of the Corrett Shelter Medicine Program began her career as an animal control officer. After graduating from the UC Davis School of Veterinary Medicine, she worked as a shelter veterinarian in California and Wisconsin. In 2001, she returned to UC Davis to become the first in the world to undertake a residency in shelter medicine. Following completion of the residency, Hurley became the director of the UC Davis Shelter Medicine Program. She says 2 of her proudest achievements are co-authoring the Association of Shelter Veterinarians Guidelines for Standards of Care in Animal Shelters and co-editing the textbook Infectious Disease Management in Animal Shelters. And actually, I misspoke. There were 3, and the third is co-founding the Million Cat Challenge. She says she loves all things shelter-related, but her particular interests include welfare of confined dogs and cats, humane and effective strategies to manage community cats, infectious disease, and, of course, topping the list, unusually short dogs. So we're really delighted to be able to bring Dr. Hurley and Dr. Levy to you today to answer your questions about the Million Cat Challenge, to help you understand how it can help your shelter save more cats. And with that, I will turn it over to you, Dr. Hurley.
This is Julie, and I'll be starting off our presentation today.
Oh, sorry, Dr. Levy.
I do welcome everybody. It's quite an honor to be here with our participating shelters. And I know a lot of the folks online today are new members of the Million Cat Challenge that joined this May. And so we thought we'd bring you up to date on what the Million Cat Challenge is, how to complete your registration if you haven't done so already, and how to leverage all of the resources that we have in the Million Cat Challenge. The Million Cat Challenge is a shelter-based initiative to save 1 million more cats in shelters over 5 years. This means that we're challenging all of the shelters that join to work with us together to share experiences about what has worked in shelters and to hear from shelters that are struggling to save more cats. This is an initiative about shelters. It's not about the academic programs that are hosting the Million Cat Challenge, but really that peer-to-peer advice that you all can offer each other, either through content on our website, through our webinars, or most importantly, our online Yahoo discussion group. This is about the victories that you're having every single day to save more cats. An aspect of the Million Cat Challenge that is really at the heart of what we do is that we do trust in the inherent desire of shelter professionals to improve care and outcomes for cats. This is not about attacking, not about criticizing. We do ask for shelters to share their data with us, and that's a risk that we understand that some shelters struggle with when they're not being supported by their community. However, the data is all kept confidential, and we roll it up to one big number that we report out. But what we do look at when you're submitting your data is shelters that are really knocking it out of the park and connecting those shelters with the shelters that are asking for help. Again, it's a very safe peer-to-peer environment. We also have collected support from all of the national organizations in animal welfare. You can see from the brands that are listed here that we've collected everyone from Alley Cat Allies to National Animal Control, ASPCA, HSUS, Best Friends, Petco, PetSmart, and others. And one thing that's really unique about this project, and the reason why there's so much support, is something has happened to make this the time when the entire animal welfare industry is turning their attention towards the plight of cats. They've been neglected so long as focus was placed more intensely on dogs, and this is the time that shelters are prepared to think about how we can serve cats better. We also want this to be a fun and inclusive community that supports, enhances, and celebrates shelters saving cats' lives. To join the challenge, we ask for a commitment just for your shelter to save at least one more cat, and we're going to help you do that by putting you together with the resources that you need to save more cats. But we're hoping that you'll think about this and think about stretch goals. What can you do to save a lot more than one cat in the future? Really all the cats that should be saved. We're a small program, and we're not trying to replicate resources that occur in other national organizations for all of the ways that shelters can serve animals and their communities. In our travels on shelter consultations, Kate and I have come to understand that there's a few key tactics that seem to really be transformational for how shelters take cats. In fact, we've boiled those down to 5 key tactics that are the laser focus of the Million Cat Challenge. These tactics focus around balancing intake, shelter care, and outcomes. They're evidence-based. They've been proven successful in shelters that are big and small, rich and poor, new and old, urban and rural. So all shelters can implement these tactics at some level if it's a good fit. But it's not required that all shelters employ all of the tactics in the challenge. They've been proven to work in all kinds of situations, regardless of the resources that are available. And they can be implemented all at once, one at a time, or just partially. So I'm going to go through those 5 initiatives, make sure we're all on the same page of what we have found to be the low-hanging fruit for saving cats in shelters. And this is what all of our resources and our expertise and Ask the Experts are built around. The first one is alternative to intake. And we define this as positive alternatives to keep cats in the home or community when admission to the shelter is not the best choice. So think of ways that you can help cats have a better outcome than coming into the shelter. And some of the ones that come immediately to mind are situations where a family has to give up a pet they love because of an unexpected medical expense. And how much better we can serve that cat and that family if we can provide that veterinary care and keep it in the home that loves it. The alternative is taking the cat into the shelter. We still have to provide the veterinary care, and we've broken the human-animal bond. So think now about how your shelter might be employing alternatives to intake in this poll question. How many of you are using alternatives to intake in your shelter? That would include diversion programs that provide support for community members to foster underage kittens or pets that are trying to rehome, pet food banks, behavior hotlines, and other activities that help support keeping cats out of the shelter in the first place. So go ahead and take the poll.
And Julie, while I'm taking the poll, I just wanted to take an opportunity to remind everybody that if you have any questions, please feel free to submit them in the questions and answer box on the bottom, and Dr. Harley and Dr. Levy will be happy to answer those at the end of the presentation.
Seem to be having a few audio issues here. I'm sorry that was a little garbled, but you should submit your questions to Dr. Levy and Dr. Kate with on your screen in the Q&A box to the left. And then to answer the poll, please answer on your screen.
All right, here's our poll results. And how exciting is this? Most of our shelters are already investigating and investing in alternatives to intake. We've got some more that are interested in working in that, and then just a few that aren't on board with this yet. Most likely this is because you haven't really investigated what those are, and this is where our communications provided by the Million Cat Challenge are so fruitful. On our discussion board, you'll be able to hear how shelters are making those interesting diversion programs happen. So our next tactic is managed admission. This is scheduling the intake of cats to match the shelter's ability to ensure humane care and safe movement to the appropriate outcome for every cat. You know, in a lot of our shelters, we've had very open door policies, which means that just come in whenever you feel like it, and we'll do our best to accommodate your needs. And so imagine, for example, going into the emergency room on a busy weekend or having an appointment scheduled with your doctor, and which scenario is going to give you better care. And most of the time, there are times when it's good for animals to come in and times when it's really not the right choice. So scheduling intake could be as simple as having intake hours so that your staff can finish the work they need to do with cleaning or veterinary care and then turn their full attention over to having a good customer service experience at intake. Or it may be asking the finders of young kittens to raise them up until their adoption age so they don't come into the shelter at 4 weeks of age, but instead they come into the shelter at 8 weeks of age when the shelter is more equipped to handle their intake. It might also involve the use of waiting lists, so that having appointments so that the cats come in when there's room for the cats rather than when the shelter is overcrowded. So think about how your shelter might be using managed admission, even if you don't call it that. And let's go to our next poll. It says, how many of you are using managed admission at your shelter? This can be anything from closing your night deposit box to scheduling appointments for non-emergency surrender. Go ahead and complete this poll. And if you have questions that are coming up as we go through these polls and this content, go ahead and type them into the chat box, and we'll be answering those at the end. A few more seconds for you to ponder this poll. Oh, very interesting again. We're having a lot of people who are using some form of managed admission. We'd really like to hear about how you're doing that in the Yahoo discussion group that we'll talk about later so that the folks who are using this well can share their tactics with the shelters that would like to but haven't been able to implement it yet. And I think this can be especially challenging for the municipal shelters, which have long had policies for having a door wide open and feel like they're restrained in their ability to handle managed admission. But we're hearing more and more from the municipal shelters that are finding out that controlling when cats come in has really helped them enhance their operations. And so they're telling the public, they're not saying no, but they're saying not now sometimes. And amazingly, the public is embracing this when they understand that it's helping more cats in the long run. Our third initiative is capacity for care. This is matching the number of cats cared for at any one time with the capacity required to assure the 5 freedoms of animal welfare for every cat. If you're not familiar with the 5 freedoms, these were actually developed for food animal care in the 1960s, and it has to do with assuring that they have the necessary food and water and shelter, and that they have humane care and they're not frightened, and that they can perform their normal behaviors of being a cat. And we've got a lot more content on our website about that. But when you think about cats, or think about shelters and how they were commonly built for dogs, for public safety, for rabies control, and to round up stray dogs in the 1950s. And then you look at the housing that's been developed for cats. Very often these shelters that had pretty nice housing for dogs, double-sided runs and sometimes outdoor space, very frequently just loaded up crowded rooms with small metal cages that the cats were put in because the cats aren't as active or as noisy, and they can be stuffed into a little tiny box. Think about your cat at home and what it likes to do, to stretch out, to eat away from its litter box, to be able to have exercise, to be able to choose or not to choose, to be around other cats. These are all issues of capacity for care that are frequently left out when we talk about housing for cats. I know a lot of you are now putting portals in old housing to rehab it, to connect multiple compartments, to give cats more of the room they need. And so our next poll question will be to think about the capacity for your care in your shelter. Have you thought about how many cats your facility and your staff can really handle and provide good quality of care for while they're there? And have you been able to do anything to really identify your capacity for care and stay within it and not become overcrowded? So this poll says, is your organization within your capacity for care? For instance, does cage housing provide at least 9 square feet of floor space? Or have you calculated your magic number of the optimal number of cats to have moving safely through your shelter at any one time? And I think this is a good time of year to ask this question because it's the beginning of kitten season, and a lot of us are already really pushing the limits of how many cats we can care for in our shelters. You know, as you're thinking about adding questions to the chat list, another thing you could add is if you've been particularly successful with a program or a project that is associated with the 5 initiatives, share that comment. Or if you have any questions that seem like major barriers to starting one of the initiatives that you'd like to, post that in there too. Oh, we've got more variety here in our responses to this poll question. It looks like about half and half know what their capacity for care is, and they use that to stay on track. And another half that is on board with the concept, but probably needs a little bit of help from their peers and maybe from Kate and I with understanding and really determining what the capacity for care is. So glad that nobody thinks this is unimportant and doesn't want to work on it at all. Our fourth initiative is removing barriers to adoption. This is expanding the pool of adopters by removing barriers to adoption such as price, process, or location. If you think back, traditionally, many shelters developed very draconian adoption interview processes that were really designed to make sure that not one single animal was placed in harm's way. And ways that we thought we could make this assurance was by turning away a lot of people who wanted cats, maybe having very steep restrictions on what kind of lifestyle the cats could have, whether children could be around cats, what landlords thought about cats, what the condition of the other cats in the household was in terms of their licensing. And we became a little bit big brother about cats, and then we started to think about ourselves and realized that a lot of us wouldn't pass our own adoption qualifications, and yet we were all very good pet owners. In fact, I got my first cat off the street when I was 15, and she went with me to vet school and my first job 22 years later. So even though I would not have been considered acceptable adoption material, I provided a great home for a cat that didn't have a home. And I have certainly snuck lots of cats into rental housing and occasionally let my rabies vaccines on my pets go a little longer than they were supposed to. So we've begun to understand that being a little judgmental and a little more supportive of pet owners has opened up a whole new audience of people that could save cats with us. And just think about it. The people who come to shelters have already heard our call not to go to breeders or not to use Craigslist as their primary pet matchup system. So even if those adopters who are coming to us need some more help to be really excellent pet adopters, we should be there for the safety net. Because what's the alternative? If we turn them away, are they not going to get a cat? Probably not. And yet what we've done is turn them to those other sources of getting a pet, and they're probably going to get an unneutered, unvaccinated cat without any support system that a shelter could offer them. So think about your long-term adoption policies and whether you've adopted any more lenient conversational-based adoption procedures, or if you're really sticking to kind of a traditional approach. So this poll says, have you experimented with removing barriers to adoption in your shelter using open-ended interviews or other adopters welcome approaches? Oh my. So I would say by far this initiative is the one that seems to be a little ahead of the others in terms of shelters modernizing their adoption procedures. We see this in conferences too, where there's a lot more buy-in as people start to experiment with things like fee-waived adoptions or special promotions, using adoption ambassadors to place cats without cats ever even coming into the shelter. So really nice again to see this progress that's being made on behalf of cats, and great to see that there's nobody who's completely opposed to the idea. And our final initiative that we found to really increase live releases in shelters is probably the most controversial and the most misunderstood, and that's Return to Field, which also goes by other names such as Shelter Neuter Return. This is similar to traditional trap-neuter return programs, except that this involves neutering and returning cats that were admitted to the shelter. And it's sterilizing, vaccinating, and returning healthy, unowned shelter cats to the location of origin as an alternative to euthanasia. And what's different from traditional return or TNR programs is that in this case, there might not be a known caregiver involved, but the assumption is made that if a cat is taken from a neighborhood and it's in good condition, that it is associated with the resources that it needs to thrive. And this is particularly appropriate for shelters that are not yet saving all the healthy and treatable cats in their shelter, because it's another live outlet. So rather than crowding a shelter with more cats, especially slow-track adoption cats, those cats can go back to their neighborhood. And besides this addressing issues of community cats that don't have one specific owner that's caring for them, it also addresses the abysmal return-to-owner rate that most shelters have for cats that come into their care. In most cases, return to owner rates for dogs for shelter strays are in the 20 to 50% range, and sadly the case in cats is about 2%. There's a lot of reasons for that, among them that cat owners frequently don't look in shelters for their cats soon enough to find them. It's also been shown that cats that are lost are 13 times more likely to return home on their own than they are to be reunited via shelter visit. So if we neuter and return cats and put them back in their neighborhood, they're far more likely to get back to their home than they are if we take them and keep them in the shelter. So think now about your own shelter and where you are with the concept of shelter neuter return or return to field programs for our next poll. That says, do you provide alternatives to adoption for cats who come into your shelter, such as spay, neuter, vaccinate, followed by returning them to where they came from, barn cat programs, warehouse, or other business placements? And not surprisingly, there's more of a mix here in the Return to Field program. It's a newer initiative that shelters are still filling out. They're also known by the terminology of feral freedom, which was implemented for the first time on a large scale in Jacksonville, Florida, and that shelter has achieved now a 90% live release rate in a big municipal shelter that does return to field for thousands of programs. And they've monitored these cats over time. Initially, a large number of the cats were microchipped so they could tell if they were repeat offenders in the shelter, and they frequently were not. And they have not seen an increase in adverse outcomes for cats in the community. So this certainly is a really powerful tool for shelters that are overwhelmed by the number of cats. And I know our southern shelters certainly fit into that bill. So in wrapping up this section of the presentation, one of the questions we're frequently asked and that sometimes keeps shelters from joining the Million Cat Challenge is the idea about whether shelters have to be adopting and embracing all 5 of these tactics. And we have some FAQs addressing this, but the short answer is absolutely not. This is a toolbox of techniques that we have found to be incredibly successful, specifically targeting saving cats in shelters. And so which of these tools and what order these tools might be rolled out in your shelter is very, very independent. So don't let one of or more of the initiatives that aren't a good fit for your shelter stop you from joining and embracing the ones that are. Remember, to join the shelter and be an active Million Cat Challenger requires only that you commit to saving 1 more cat this year than you have in the past, but we're hoping that by embracing these initiatives in full or in part, you're going to be saving many more than 1. And with that, I would like to turn over the presentation to Dr. Hurley, who's going to take us to, I'm sorry, I'm skipping a poll, did that sort of awkwardly. Take you to the next section about the nitty-gritty of how the Million Cat Challenge works.
And this is Christy again. Before Dr. Hurley begins, I just want to let people know it really helps us out if you could submit your questions as they occur to you rather than waiting until the end. And there's a Q&A box over in the left-hand column of your screen. If you could just send your questions in there, that would be great. Thank you.
All right, thanks so much, Julie, and it's really been fun getting to know our new challengers over these last few slides and polls, and looking forward to getting to know you all more. But now we thought we'd give you a look at some of the emails that land in our inbox. We love hearing from you, and you'll have a chance to ask us a few more questions at the end of the presentation here, and then, of course, anytime at info@millioncatchallenge.org. I wanted to mention also there are some live links in these slides, and we'll send out a PDF of the slides as well as there being an archived version of this webinar. So if you want to explore some of the links, you can pick up that PDF. We'll send it out to the Million Cat Yahoo group. We're going to talk about how to join that group in a few minutes here, and then explore these at your leisure. So no need to be frantically writing these down. Of course, the first big question that we get is, what data do we need to provide? And we love counting cats here at Million Cat Challenge Central, but we try to make this part easy. All we ask is 3 numbers, not percentages, not interested in rates, but just your live cat intake. If you track owner-intended euthanasia separately, we ask that you exclude that from both intake and euthanasia, but no problem if you don't count those 2 categories separately. Your euthanasia and the number of cats released alive in aggregate, including adoptions, return to field, transfer to another organization, any permanent live outcome. We don't include foster as an outcome or as an intake category on either end because it's not a permanent outcome. At enrollment, we ask for your 2012 intake, euthanasia, and live release because that's our baseline year against which we're counting the million. We also ask for your most recent calendar year. And then we hope this is the fun part for you. We ask you to take a look at your most recent calendar year, how many cats came in, how many cats were euthanized, and how many cats left your care alive. And think about your goals for the current calendar year. Do you hope that intake's going to go down because you're providing alternatives to intake for neonatal kittens or for people who can't keep their cats, supporting them and solving those problems on their own? Or do you expect intake to go up because you're taking on a new contract or because your capacity has increased because you're in a new building or you have some new programs? For euthanasia, we hope that you're going to find a way to euthanize 1 less cat if you're still in a position of euthanizing cats for whom you feel that's not the right outcome. But if you're already at a point where you're no-kill or only euthanizing cats that are terminally suffering, then we're wondering, are you going to see your live release go up by at least 1 cat? So no need to worry about how that counts into the million. We do the math. You just enter the numbers and let us know what your goal is. And then once a year only, we ask you to update what were your actual numbers for the previous calendar year, intake, euthanasia, and live release, and what are your goals for the upcoming year. No individual shelter data is ever made public without your permission, and we don't even make it public like on a statewide basis because we have some states where there's very few shelters, and we know that people would be able to figure out what that is. So at the most narrow level, we'd make it public on a wide regional basis, but really all you're going to see is the aggregate number. And remember, every cat counts, so if you're going to save just 1 more life, we want you in the challenge. Here's another question that we love to get. Now that we're in, how do we join the party? So the first thing that we hope you'll do, and this is actually part of the Maddie's grant, is join our discussion group. And many of you already got that invitation, your welcome email, and I know a lot of you have already joined up. But I encourage you to think about who else on your team would benefit. And the more people in your organization that are part of the conversation, the more robust that whole conversation is going to be. So think about who's on your management team. Think about if you have a veterinarian or a medical team, would they benefit from joining that discussion? Maybe it's your volunteer coordinator who's really excited about implementing some new programs for cats. So that's at your discretion. I tried all kinds of ways to Google this group. You can't find it. It's a private group. It's invitation only. But I've got the link posted there, so if you're already part of the group, you can get it from the slides, or you can always just email us at info@millioncatchallenge.org. When you request an invite to join the group, just remember to tell us what challenge or shelter you're with, because it is a group that's limited to challengers only. And then it's time to start digging into what are the resources associated with the Million Cat Challenge. And, of course, we hope that you'll spend some time on our website if you haven't already. But we also have a blog at blog.millioncatchallenge.org, and you can read updates on where we're going to be and when, and news about challengers and ruminations from the deaths of Dr. Hurley and Dr. Levy. Please follow us on Facebook. We love to hear from our challengers. We love to know what you're up to. And if you are on our website and you're new to the challenge and to the 5 initiatives, we've talked about them very briefly, but we have much more detailed information on the website at our resource center. So we have detailed information on how to choose which initiatives are right for you, which ones to start with, how to start small and build to get bigger, and then details on each one. We also have much more from the contents of our inbox at Dear Million Cat Challenge for each of the initiatives, so check that out under our resources. And if you're more of a webinar watcher or listener than a website reader, Maddie's Institute did a great series on the 5 initiatives about a year ago, and different shelter leaders that have implemented them and practical question and answer. Those are fantastic. And if you're like me and you don't like sitting and watching a webinar, these are great even just to listen to, and I've listened to them all several times. I listen to them like a podcast when I'm on my way into work, and the Q&A is inspirational, and then you can always go back and check out the slides if you want to see the images that were associated with whatever you were listening to. So those are on the Maddie's Institute website, and if you don't want to go to the link, you can just type in Maddie's Institute Million Cat, and you'll get right there. So now that you've seen some of the resources, curious to know what looks most interesting to you. The support of your peers in the discussion group, resources about the 5 initiatives and other tools to implement in your shelters, webinars, the ability to ask the experts, the Million Cat newsletter, getting your own Million Cat Challenge tattoo to match the one I got a couple of weeks ago, which is itching like crazy today, I will warn you, or helping to overcome your data allergy. I love your enthusiasm. 16.7% of you. Well, if you're going to be at the Best Friends Conference in Salt Lake City, I'm thinking about getting a little addition to my tattoo there, so join me. Or if you get your own Million Cat Challenge tattoo, be sure and send us a picture. And meanwhile, we'll take this under advisement and work on bringing you the resources that you're interested in. So I know you also want to know, how else can you celebrate joining this historic campaign? And I mentioned we love hearing from you. We love seeing your pictures. This is the Kern County Animal Services, a shelter that historically has really struggled with cats, and they're doing so much better. And here they are showing off the Million Cat Challenge window cling that's on their front door. Show us your tattoos. Show us you posing with your pins in various spots. And tell your friends. Help them join this campaign and also get $500 for every shelter you refer during the Maddie's Grant period, which runs through the end of May. And you can just go to millioncatchallenge.org. On the top of the menu, you'll see who's involved, and that'll take you to our Million Cat Challenger map. And then you can actually filter by state to see who's already in the challenge from your state. And if you look closely at this map, you'll see we really still have a gap across the middle of the country. So if any of you are from the Dakotas, Nebraska, Montana, up in there, we could use a few more challengers. And if you could use $500 and they could use $1,000, now is a great time. And you can just send them the homepage for millioncatchallenge.org to get all the details about the grant and how to get started. If you have questions for us, as always, email us at info@millioncatchallenge.org. And tell the world you've got Million Cat Challenge pride. We'd love to see these headlines, and it's a great thing for your community to see that your shelter is joining with others to make a commitment to save more cat lives and be part of something really big. There's a link to your press kit in your welcome letter. You can always log into your dashboard, or again, email us if you want some more guidance. Or you know what's fun is actually just go into Google News and click on Million Cat Challenge and see what other shelters are saying about their participation. And finally, call us anytime you have questions about anything. Just dial info@millioncatchallenge.org. Operators are standing by. And just in summary, to join the Million Cat Challenge and qualify for the Maddie's Grant, register your shelter, tell us which shelter referred you, if anyone did, so that they can get their $500 grant. Enter your data, join the Yahoo group, and help us save 1 million lives or maybe many more. I'm just going to send out a quick poll now to ask you who has completed all of the steps and they're in the Million Cat Challenge. And you'll see a green thumbs up and a red thumbs down on your screen, I hope. Woohoo! All right, and with most districts reporting, looks like we've got 30 up and 6 still waiting. So those 6 of you who are still working on it, we hope you'll let us know if you're having any problems or questions. And that brings us to our final poll question. And I'll tell you, if you can write in a better way of asking what excites you most about the Million Cat Challenge, we would love to know how to ask that question. But is it being one of the cool kids? Is it saving cats? Is it the joy of data? Is it knowing that one day you'll be able to stand up and say you were part of the million? Or is it really all 4? It's hard to choose. And love the 3.6% of you that love data, but we know it's all about saving cats. With that, thank you for joining us today on your lunch break or your afternoon break, depending on what time zone you're in. Thank you, Maddie, for making this possible. And we will open it up now to your questions.
Thank you, Dr. Hurley and Dr. Levy, for giving us a nice overview of the Million Cat Challenge and the resources at our fingertips. If you don't mind, we're going to jump into some questions here, and I'll just go ahead and ask each one of you to answer them as they come in. So, Julie, this one is for you. FIV and FELV cases are handled differently in most shelters. How do you recommend handling these special cases?
That's a great topic and certainly one of very current discussion. As shelters are getting control of their populations through all of these great initiatives and long-term spay-neuter, they're starting to dig down on what has been traditionally considered tough topics like FELV and FIV. And we certainly see shelters who used to euthanize these cats starting to adopt the FIV cats, usually as a first step. New information is emerging from our research colleagues that shows that these cats generally live a long time and are a lot less risk for infecting other cats than we used to think. And the adoption programs that we've heard about so far in the discussion group have been incredibly popular and successful. I think FELV cats are going to be coming on the heels. We're starting to see people consider those, but it is a slightly tougher topic because FELV is more likely to make cats sick in a shorter amount of time, and it's a little more infectious. So one great thing about the Yahoo discussion group is that shelters are sharing their protocols, actually their written scripts and their client handouts and their SOPs for how to market and adopt these cats out in a way that is responsible for the cats and the new folks who are adopting them. So 2 thumbs up for the shelters that are giving this a try, and I think we're going to see this spreading across the country as word gets out about how successful it is.
Julie, if a challenge shelter wants in on those resources and SOPs, where would they find those?
So that's where you join the Yahoo discussion group, and we already have a lot of great content archive that's already been submitted, but it's also okay just to join the group and send out a message by email saying that your shelter is considering this and you'd like to hear from all the shelters who've already done it, and you'll be getting great experience-based information from your peer shelters.
Oh, wonderful. Thanks, Julie. Kate, we have a question. We're way over our capacity for care. How do we lower the numbers without euthanizing a lot of cats to get started?
That's a great question. It's actually a topic of a question from our mailbag at millioncatchallenge.org and Dear Million Cat Challenge, so you can go there for the longer answer. But the short answer is to remember, you only need to bring it back into balance once, and then your new set point will be maintained, right? It's just like you only have to pay down your credit. If you're in over your head on your credit card, you only need to pay down that bill one time, and then you'll actually have more money to buy the stuff that you need, and you don't need to keep bringing it down every month. So with that in mind, different ways that shelters have done it is, one, to wait until winter and just commit to a new set point where we call the shelter full and do what we need to do to balance intake with positive outcomes at a lower set point. You can hold a big promotion. Some shelters have combined this with improvements to housing, like a really cute promotion that was done was photoshopping little hard hats onto all the cats and saying, hey, we're undergoing construction to improve our housing, and putting all the cats on sale for $5. You can also just do a short term, even if managed admissions or waiting lists is not something that you normally do it once just to get your population number down. And then remember, once you have fewer cats in the building and they're healthier, you'll actually be able to serve more cats over time. So all those cats that you asked to wait will be able to come in and then some. And I've heard from shelter after shelter after shelter that has done this a little bit nervously, but then found that over time, indeed, not only did their live release go up, but their intake was able to go up because they had more capacity to serve more cats by serving fewer at any one time. So more on that on the website, and you know I love to talk about it. You can also check out the 5 Initiative webinar on capacity for care to hear about how a couple of shelters did that at the Maddie's Institute site.
Thank you, Kate. Julie, we're an open admissions municipal shelter. How can we utilize managed admissions or capacity for care? We can't control how many cats come in or even when.
This is a question that we frequently hear when we're doing consultations for municipal shelters. And one thing to look at to start with is to dust out your county code and find out what your shelter really is obligated to do. We have found more often than not that legally shelters are obligated to deal with dangers and injured animals, but not necessarily every single animal that is found out in the community or that someone wants to bring in. And most of the time it's shelter policy, which is something that can be changed with appropriate input without going back and revisiting your municipal code. So municipal shelters are starting to experiment with having intake hours, for instance. So it maybe instead of being open to intake the entire time the shelter is staffed, is that there's less hours so that job can be done really well, and we can offer the public more support in keeping their pets rather than just taking them in. There's also some managed admission tactics such as providing kitten care kits for people who have found underage kittens, and rather than just taking them into a shelter that can't deal with underage kittens, we encourage those folks to raise the kittens up and then either find homes for them themselves or to bring them in when we can accommodate those kittens. Sometimes it's a matter of just making an appointment. There are plenty of county and city offices that don't serve people on a walk-in basis. You actually have to make an appointment for services, so that's not such a radical idea. But I think one thing to do that takes some of the fear out of these kinds of changes is to start small with focused experiments and consider them to be pilot projects. So rather than making a sweeping policy change, is to say we're going to try a new tactic for 6 months and see how it goes. And that, I find, is a way to crack the door open to more and more change without getting a lot of pushback from staff or the public. But to be honest, it's usually the staff that has the most concern, not the public.
So true. Start small. Thank you, Julie. Kate, our county shelter faces a lot of opposition for any TNR or return to field programs. Do you recommend a good way to get this started and how to combat the opposition?
Well, one thing I would say is use the discussion group and try and get some clarity on what it is that is causing the concerns. Is it that people are worried that community members are going to complain about the cats? and you can talk with shelters that have had years of experience now returning tens of thousands of cats to the field and how they've handled the complaints and what their experience has been of actually reducing the number of complaints that come in about cats. Is the concern about public health or about cats' impact on wildlife? We have resources at millioncatchallenge.org in our resource bank to combat those different concerns. So hone in on what the concerns are, and then just the same as with managed missions, consider just starting small. Pick a neighborhood that maybe is in a commissioner's district that is amenable, that already is participating in feeding some unowned cats or is just more cat-friendly. Do it for a short time. Do it with a limited number of cats. And feel free to make exceptions. If you can return just some of the cats to the field, then that's an improvement, and then oftentimes you can build from there. So you'll notice that all the answers are going to be similar. We have resources about that on the website. You can get more specific information in the discussion group. And then you can always just start small, try it out for yourself, and then turn back to the discussion group for help on tailoring it to your particular situation.
And Kate, I have one more for you. Won't capacity for care mean that we're saving fewer cats in the long run?
Absolutely not. And think about it like your credit card. If you spend more than you earn during a period of time so that you end up carrying a balance on your credit card and paying interest on it, you're going to be able to purchase less over time because you're spending some of your money just paying your interest rate. And that's really what happens when shelters get over their capacity for care. Cats get stressed, they get sick, they stay longer, and you end up spending some of your precious resources just dealing with having cats that aren't real happy and aren't real healthy in your shelter. If you bring down the number of cats in your shelter at any one time to just the number you can keep healthy and happy and move through to a positive outcome efficiently, that's like never putting more on your credit card than you can pay off at the end of the month. That means you're never spending money on interest. You're spending it all on the good stuff that you want. And you're never wasting a day of care on a cat that is not moving towards his or her right outcome. And consistently, we find that shelters that go to capacity for care actually end up serving more cats over time. Sometimes that means admitting more cats and finding homes for more cats. Sometimes that means transferring in cats. One of the shelters we worked with that went to capacity for care and dropped their housing capacity by about half, now actually is transferring in cats from here in California over 1,000 miles away because they're moving cats through their own system so efficiently. But sometimes it also means helping more cats in your own community by investing in programs to help all cats that are out and about, like neuter return programs, like low-cost spay-neuter, or other programs to help keep pets in their homes, because you're not investing so much in taking care of cats that are sick or stressed out. So talk about capacity for care is really sort of the magic initiative. The hardest thing about it is that it seems too good to be true, but it really is. Taking better care of cats is win-win-win for staff, for cats, and for the life-saving success of the organization.
So URI is the interest I'm paying on being overcrowded. By finding my magic number, I'm eliminating the interest, and I can ultimately spend more.
Yep.
Thank you, Kate. Next question. How do we know if we've completed our data properly to be approved for the challenge? If your data is not completed or if your data hasn't been approved, you'll hear from somebody at the Million Cat Challenge team. If you don't and you've been invited to the Yahoo group, you can assume that your data is entered properly. Okay, next question. We are a no-kill shelter. Can we still be in the challenge? Julie, that's for you.
Of course you can. There's two ways that we calculate life-saving. One is a reduction in euthanasia, and one is an increase in life-saving. So what we look at is we ask you to report both live outcomes and euthanasias, and we compare it to a baseline year. So remember that we're talking about moving the needle, saving more cats than were done in the baseline year. And so what we'll do automatically is calculate how many fewer euthanasias were completed and how many more live outcomes were completed. And of those two numbers, we're going to pick the highest number to be the number that's contributed to the Million Cat Challenge. So for a no-kill group that only euthanizes animals for medical or behavioral reasons, then we would be thinking that your stretch goal would be how to become more efficient so you can save more cats in your community. And that might be transferring more cats out of the local municipal shelter. It might be raising more orphan kittens up to live outcomes, or it may be serving the public so they don't have to give their cats up in the first place. So think about saving more cats, seeing more live outcomes originating from your shelter, and that's how the no-kill groups would be participating.
So if I'm euthanizing 0 cats, but I take in 500 more than I did last year, those 500 are going towards the million?
They'll go towards the million when they leave your shelter. So just accumulating and intaking more cats isn't what we're looking for. This really isn't a sanctuary movement per se. We're looking for more traditional sheltering, how to move cats in through the system to appropriate good outcomes at the end, whatever that takes. So if you have 500 more adoptions than you had last year, that would be 500 cats that we'd be contributing to the million.
Wonderful. Thank you, Julie. Kate, can you utilize less than 9 square feet per cat if you're in a community room and there's lots of vertical space?
Sadly, the rule for community rooms is actually more than 9 square feet of cats.
What?
In fact, it's 18 square feet of floor space per cat because they need to use the space in the room to negotiate their relationships with other cats there. Vertical space helps, but it doesn't count towards that requirement. And actually, this is a great topic. There's been a lively discussion about this in the discussion group, so I'm going to, especially since we're getting short on time here, I'm going to suggest that go to the Yahoo group and read all about that.
Okay. Julie, our rescue shelter was born in 2015. Therefore, we have no data for 2012. Does this disqualify us?
No, it doesn't disqualify you. You're not alone. There's a few shelters that are new, but they're all in with the Million Cat Challenge, and we want to welcome them as part of the team that's going to save 1 million cats over 5 years. So what you would do is enter your baseline data, your last full year of data, in the slots for 2012, and during your registration process, leave us a note that that's what you're doing. So for instance, if your first data is from 2015, you would enter that in what we use as 2012 data. You would enter it again in the 2015 data, and then the 2016 data would be your pledge or life-saving goal for this year. That's very complicated, and you might even forget before you hang up from this phone call. So that is something that would be an appropriate question to send us at info@millioncatchallenge.org, and we'll walk you through it. But we do want your voice to be heard.
Oh, good. Thank you, Julie. Kate, where do I find out info about whether my local shelter has to take in a cat or dog, regardless of capacity, time, or day?
That information you should get from your local shelter. You can call them up and ask, or check out their website and let them know about the Million Cat Challenge if they'd like to see about revisiting that policy.
Okay. And our last question is, how do we get the $1,000 grant after we've completed the requirements? At the end of May, when we're done going through and checking all the shelters that have joined the Million Cat Challenge, we're going to give that entire list to Maddie's Fund, and they'll be contacting you in June to work out disbursement arrangements. We only have 1 moment left in our webinar today. We want to thank everybody for taking the time and spending their lunch hour with us. I wanted to let you know that today we are at 560,551 lives saved, and we have over 1,200 challengers and supporting organizations that have become part of the million. And we want to thank you for joining us on this cat crusade. Together we are making every cat count, and we're so happy to be spending this time with you on Tuesday. If you need any more questions answered that we didn't get to today in the webinar, you have any follow-up resource questions, you can find those at www.millioncatchallenge.org, or always feel free to email us at info@millioncatchallenge.org. See you in the discussion groups.